cabin boy named Richard Parker was killed and eaten by shipwrecked sailors. A novel had already described his death by that exact name 46 years before he was born. The boat was the dinghy of a yacht called the Mignonette. It was the 5th of July, 1884, and she had gone down in minutes, 1,600 miles from the nearest coast, somewhere in the empty middle of the South Atlantic. The strange thing is that the yacht had not been struggling. Dudley had actually given the order to slow her and ride out the weather so the exhausted crew could get a proper night's sleep. Parker had just been sent below to make tea. And in that ordinary moment, a single wave struck her side and tore the hull open. Dudley understood at once that she was finished. He shouted for the small boat to be launched, and the four of them scrambled in with barely any time to gather anything at all. The captain, Tom Dudley, was the last man off. He grabbed what he could reach. 2 small tins of turnips, a little water, no mast, no sail, no compass. The dinghy was 13 feet long, open to the sky, with 2 oars and nothing else. Then the yacht slid under, and 4 men were left sitting in a boat the length of a small car, with 3 miles of ocean underneath them, and no way to steer toward land. You know, sitting where you are, that they should never have been out there in the first place. The Mignonette was a pleasure yacht, built for calm afternoons on English rivers. A wealthy Australian lawyer had bought her and wanted her sailed to Sydney, a voyage of 15,000 miles across the open sea in a boat never meant for it. Nobody wanted the job. The crossing frightened experienced sailors. Dudley took it anyway, and he assembled a crew of 4. There was Dudley himself, the captain, 31 years old. There was Edwin Stephens, the mate. There was Edmund Brooks, an able seaman. And there was the cabin boy, 17 years old, on his first voyage. A boy from London who had signed on to see the world, and had never been to sea before. His name was Richard Parker. Hold on to that name. For the first days in the boat, they did the things that drowning men do. They rationed the turnips, 1 tin split between 4 mouths across days that had no end. On the 4th day they caught a turtle, and for a while the turtle was everything. They ate the meat. They drank what fluid they could wring from it. But a turtle is not an ocean of food, and soon there was nothing again, and the water ran out, and the sun came up every morning over the same flat, indifferent horizon. By the 2nd week they were drinking their own urine. This is what the body does at the edge. It stops being a person and becomes a problem to be solved, a chemistry of thirst and heat and salt. And here the story turns because one of the 4 made a decision the others did not. Around the 8th day, Richard Parker did the thing every sailor is warned never to do. He leaned over the side and he drank the seawater. You have to understand what that means. Seawater is saltier than blood. To process it, the body pulls fresh water out of its own cells to flush the salt, which means every mouthful of the sea leaves you thirstier than before, and then sicker, and then delirious. The boy had reached the point where the torture of thirst outweighed the fear of it. He drank, and within a day or 2, he was lying in the bottom of the boat, unable to sit up, drifting in and out of sense. So now there were 3 men who could still function, and 1 boy who was dying. And the 3 men began to talk about something that has a name among sailors, an old and terrible name. They called it the custom of the sea. Here is what the custom of the sea meant. For centuries, in the unwritten code of desperate men adrift, there was a belief that if everyone was going to die, it was permissible for some to live by consuming the one who was already closest to death. And there was a ritual to make it bearable, to make it feel like fate instead of murder. You drew lots. Everyone put their life on a slip of paper or a marked stick, and chance chose the victim, and because chance chose, no single man had to carry the guilt of choosing. That was the theory. That was the story sailors told themselves. And it was not a rare story. For generations before the Mignonette, shipwrecked crews had drawn lots and eaten the loser, and when they were rescued and told the truth, the wider world had usually looked away, treating it as a tragedy of the sea rather than a crime. The custom was real, and its impunity was real, which is exactly why Dudley expected forgiveness. Dudley raised it first. He suggested they draw lots. And this is the detail that matters, the detail the popular version of this story almost always gets wrong. They did not draw lots. Brooks, the able seaman, refused outright. He would not take part in it, not the drawing, not the killing. And, with Brooks out, the ritual collapsed, because the whole point of drawing lots was to spread the responsibility across every hand. So the two remaining men, Dudley and Stephens, did something colder than the custom of the sea. They stopped pretending chance was involved. They looked at the boy who was already dying, who had no family who depended on him the way they told themselves theirs did, and they decided. Sit with how that decision was actually made? Not by lottery, not by the boy's consent, by two men choosing the weakest and calling it necessity. On roughly the 24th day, Parker was lying in the bottom of the boat in a coma. Beyond speaking, beyond knowing, Dudley said a prayer. He asked forgiveness for what they were about to do. And then, with a small penknife, he cut the boy's throat. Brooks, who had refused the lottery, did not refuse the food. All three men survived on what was left of Richard Parker for 4 more days. And on the 4th day, a sail appeared. A German ship, the Montezuma, found the dinghy and pulled 3 living men out of it. They were skeletal, sunburned to leather, barely able to stand. They were saved. And here is where the story stops being a survival tale and becomes something else entirely, because most men in their position would have agreed on a lie. A shark took him. He died of thirst and we buried him at sea. Any of those would have held. Dudley did not lie. Back on English soil in Falmouth, he told the truth plainly, calmly, in full detail. He believed he had done what the custom of the sea allowed. He expected the sympathy of other seafaring men, because for generations that sympathy is exactly what the custom had granted. He did not understand that he had stepped into a new century, and the law was no longer willing to look away. Dudley and Stephens were arrested and charged with murder. Brooks, who had refused to draw lots, was not charged at all, and instead became a witness. And the trial that followed, Regina versus Dudley and Stephens, became one of the most important cases in the entire history of criminal law, because the question it asked was one no court had ever had to answer so directly. If you will certainly die unless you kill an innocent person, does necessity make it legal? The court's answer was no. It has been no ever since. The judges did something unusual to reach it, rather than let a jury simply acquit 2 sympathetic, half-starved men. The trial judge steered the case toward what is called a special verdict, in which the jury laid out the raw facts of what happened and left the question of guilt entirely to the court. That maneuver stripped away the mercy a jury might have shown and forced the law itself to answer the hard question in the open. And the law ruled that necessity is not a defense to murder, that no man may appoint himself the judge of whose life is worth more, not even at the edge of the world with the sea closing in. To let a starving man decide who dies, the court reasoned, is to unfasten the one rule that separates law from appetite. Who, the judges asked, is to weigh one life against another? By what measure? The strongest? The most useful? The youngest? Once you allow the question at all, there is no honest place to stop. Dudley and Stephens were sentenced to death, though the judges recommended mercy in the same breath. The public, who had largely sympathized with them, was outraged that seamen following the old custom should hang for it, and the Crown, which had wanted the principle carved permanently into law, but never intended to see the men executed, commuted the sentence. They served 6 months in prison and walked free. Now go back to the name, Richard Parker, because this is the part that has unsettled people for more than a century, and it is entirely true. 46 years before the Mignonette sank, in 1838, Edgar Allan Poe published the only novel he ever wrote. It was called The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. In it, a ship is wrecked, and 4 survivors are trapped in a boat with no food, and they do the thing sailors did. They draw lots to decide who will be eaten. The lot falls to a young sailor. The others kill him and survive on his body. And the name Poe gave to that doomed fictional character, decades before a real boy was ever born to carry it, was Richard Parker. A made-up cabin boy, drawn by lots, killed and eaten in a novel. And then, half a century later, a real cabin boy with the same name, in the same ocean, killed for the same reason. Poe did not predict anything. There is no magic here. It is a coincidence, and the world is large enough that coincidences this strange are, statistically, bound to happen somewhere to someone. But knowing that does not make it feel any smaller when you are the one holding both facts at once. And maybe that is the real reason this story has never let go of the people who hear it. Not the cannibalism, not even the trial. It is the way it forces you to look at the machinery underneath your own certainty. You believe, sitting comfortably right now, that there are lines you would never cross. That decency is a fixed part of who you are. The men in that boat believed the same thing on the day they left Southampton. They were ordinary. They were not monsters. And then the water ran out, and the turtle was gone, and the boy drank the sea, and the custom whispered its old permission, and the line they thought was carved in stone turned out to be drawn in sand. The law that came out of that boat exists precisely because the court understood something the sailors learned too late. The rule against killing the innocent cannot depend on the goodness of the person tempted to break it, because in the right boat, on the right day, that goodness runs out faster than the water does. The line has to be held from the outside, by something that does not get thirsty. 4 men climbed into a 13-foot boat with 2 tins of turnips and no water. 3 came home, and the name of the one who did not had already been written, 46 years before, into a story about exactly how he would die.